Carolyn Byington was born on May 30, 1993, in Plainsboro, New Jersey. She lived there with her parents and older sister, and from an early age, she dreamed of exploring the world. After completing high school, Carolyn went on to attend Lafayette College, where she participated in 2 study abroad programs that allowed her to travel to Japan and Germany. During her time in college, she earned 3 bachelor's degrees in international affairs, sociology, and anthropology. After graduating in 2015, she got a job at a marketing firm located not far from her hometown, and she rented an apartment in Plainsboro to remain close to her family. Outside of her job, she volunteered with a local youth league and remained active in various charitable activities. Over the following years, Carolyn continued working at the same company, contributing to her community, and traveling whenever she could. On June 10, 2019, 26-year-old Carolyn decided to return home during her lunch break. She was expected back at the office later that afternoon, but as the hours passed, there was still no sign of her. Her coworkers began to worry and tried calling her, but Carolyn didn't answer. The situation seemed completely out of character. Carolyn was never the type to miss work, and she almost never went home during lunch. She typically stayed in the office. By early evening, their concern had turned into real alarm, and they eventually contacted the police to request a welfare check. Around 6 p.m., officers arrived at Carolyn's apartment complex and discovered that her front door was unlocked. When they went inside, they were confronted with a horrifying sight. Carolyn was lying on the floor, and judging by the amount of blood surrounding her, it was immediately clear she was dead. While the medical examiner began inspecting the body, investigators started searching for evidence and speaking with possible witnesses. One neighbor informed police that he had heard screams around noon. He also mentioned that afterward, there were strange noises coming from Carolyn's apartment, as if someone was moving furniture around. However, no one reported seeing any unfamiliar people, and the apartment complex did not have any security cameras. Inside the apartment, police didn't find much to work with either. It appeared that the killer had attempted to clean the scene using bleach in order to cover their tracks. Most likely, the noises the neighbor had heard were the killer doing exactly that. While investigators searched for security footage from nearby buildings and looked for any additional leads, the medical examiner finished the autopsy. Carolyn had suffered multiple blows to the head, most likely from fists. In addition, she had been stabbed several times in the neck with both scissors and a screwdriver. There were no indications of sexual assault, and nothing had been taken from the apartment, but one detail stood out to detectives. The scissors and screwdriver had come from Carolyn's own apartment. That helped rule out the 2 most common motives, robbery and sexual assault, and pointed police towards something far more personal. The extreme brutality of the attack further supported that theory. It seemed clear that whoever had done this wasn't just trying to kill, they were consumed with rage. Police began speaking with Carolyn's family and friends, but none of them could think of anyone who would have wanted to harm her. They all described her as kind, easygoing, and entirely non-confrontational. She wasn't in a relationship at the time, nor did she have any problematic exes who might have held a grudge. Then detectives turned to her coworkers, and that's when things started to get interesting. They discovered that on the same day Carolyn left the office for lunch, another employee did as well, a 30-year-old man named Kenneth Saul. On its own, that didn't seem suspicious. But what drew their attention was the fact that Kenneth didn't return to work until late in the afternoon. Their manager told police that Kenneth had called to say he was having car trouble and needed to stop by a repair shop. However, later on, the manager checked and found that Kenneth had never actually gone to the place he had mentioned. Other coworkers had noticed a few odd things as well. When Kenneth came back to the office, he seemed nervous and had scratches on his hands. During a casual conversation, he even asked whether police could arrest someone based only on circumstantial evidence. Investigators were definitely intrigued by what they heard and decided to take a closer look at Kenneth. He worked as an accountant, was married, and had recently become a father. His daughter had been born just a year earlier. He had no criminal record, and on the surface, he didn't appear to fit the profile of a killer. Still, detectives couldn't ignore the mounting red flags and decided to speak with him directly. Kenneth repeated the same story he had told his boss, that he had left work during lunch to get his car repaired at a shop. But when detectives asked him for a receipt or any proof, he couldn't produce anything. Later, Kenneth changed his story, claiming that he hadn't gone to a repair shop at all but had instead fixed the car himself in a nearby park. That sudden change didn't sit well with investigators. For one thing, the fact that he altered his story at all raised suspicions, and more importantly, Kenneth was an accountant, not exactly someone you'd expect to handle car repairs on his own rather than going to a mechanic. Even so, Kenneth continued to deny any involvement in the murder, and police didn't yet have enough evidence to arrest him. Sometime later, however, they found something noteworthy. While reviewing surveillance footage from nearby buildings, they also examined dashcam video from a patrol car that had passed through the area shortly after noon. On that footage, they spotted Kenneth's car, which completely contradicted his story. Carolyn's apartment complex was located in another town, about 6 miles from the office. Kenneth had claimed he was fixing his car in a park near work, but the footage clearly placed him near her home. Although this was still considered circumstantial evidence, it strengthened the case against him. Another reason to suspect Kenneth came from the autopsy. Medical examiners had discovered traces of skin beneath Carolyn's fingernails, suggesting that she had scratched her attacker during the struggle. And Kenneth happened to have fresh scratches on his hands, ones he couldn't explain. The only issue was that the biological material collected wasn't sufficient to produce a complete DNA profile. Despite that setback, police took a DNA sample from Kenneth and sent it to the lab. The results came back inconclusive. Experts couldn't definitively link the DNA found under Carolyn's nails to Kenneth, but they also couldn't rule him out. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to keep him under suspicion. By this point, detectives were almost certain Kenneth was responsible. Over the next few weeks, they kept searching for additional evidence, but nothing new surfaced. Eventually, they consulted with the district attorney, and together they decided that the circumstantial evidence might be strong enough to hold up in court. 2 months after Carolyn's murder, police arrested Kenneth and placed him in jail while awaiting trial. That's when the case took a shocking turn. As detectives continued building their case, they received a letter from the jail, written by none other than Kenneth's cellmate. What he revealed stunned everyone involved in the investigation. According to the inmate, Kenneth had offered him $15,000 to commit a murder after he was released, and the plan was disturbingly specific. The intended victim was to be a random woman between 25 and 30 years old, and the weapon had to be a screwdriver and a pair of scissors. Kenneth even instructed him to stab her in the neck and to clean the scene with bleach afterward. Detectives had no doubt the cellmate was telling the truth because at that time, the details of Carolyn's murder hadn't been made public. Only the killer could have known what weapons were used and how the scene had been cleaned. It appeared Kenneth's plan was to make it look as if there were a serial killer targeting young women in the same manner Carolyn had been killed. Since he would already be in jail when the second attack occurred, he believed police would stop suspecting him. But that wasn't the only scheme he shared. Kenneth also proposed a second plan to his cellmate, one even more twisted than the first. He said the man could either kill the lead detective on the case or one of the people police had interviewed during the investigation into Carolyn's death. If the second option was chosen, Kenneth instructed him to stage the scene to make it look like the person had taken their own life and to leave a note on the body confessing to Carolyn's murder. The goal was for police to believe that person had killed Carolyn, which would lead to Kenneth being cleared of all charges and set free. As for the idea of killing the detective, it wasn't entirely clear what Kenneth expected to gain, but it seemed he thought that without the lead investigator, the entire case would collapse. On top of that, Kenneth even gave his cellmate advice on how to avoid getting caught afterward, all while ignoring the fact that he himself had been captured almost immediately. The entire plan was so absurd it sounded like something a child might think up. But Kenneth was deadly serious. He truly believed it would secure his release. After learning all this, detectives asked the inmate to wear a wire and bring up the topic again in conversation with Kenneth. The inmate agreed, And it didn't take long before detectives had Kenneth on tape casually discussing the arrangement of multiple murders. That same day, prison staff searched Kenneth's cell and discovered several handwritten notes, confessing to Carolyn's murder. The intention was to plant them next to the body of whoever his cellmate was supposed to kill, just as Kenneth had planned. He had written the notes himself, assuming no one would bother comparing the handwriting. With that, Kenneth had not only provided investigators with even more evidence linking him to Carolyn's death, but he had also earned additional charges for conspiracy to commit murder. Yet despite everything they had uncovered, detectives still had no idea why Kenneth had killed Carolyn in the first place. Eventually, however, they got their answer, and it was something no one expected. Kenneth remained in jail for several years, and in November 2022, 3 years after his arrest, prosecutors decided to offer him a deal. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, they still lacked a definitive DNA match, fingerprints, or any solid physical proof directly tying him to the crime scene, which made the upcoming trial a risky one. So they offered Kenneth a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would have to admit to the murder. Kenneth agreed. He told investigators that he had started working at the company in 2016, 3 years before the killing. That was where he met Carolyn, and over time, he developed romantic feelings for her, despite being married. But Carolyn wasn't interested, and she made that clear. Still, Kenneth refused to accept it. Outwardly, he appeared to move on, but beneath the surface, he was growing increasingly obsessed. Kenneth never harassed her or made any direct advances, so to most people, it seemed like he had let it go. But privately, his fixation deepened, eventually turning into full-blown stalking. At some point, Kenneth secretly took Carolyn's house keys, made a copy, and then returned the originals without her ever noticing. From then on, he began entering her apartment whenever she wasn't home, usually during his lunch breaks. But it didn't stop there. He eventually went further and installed hidden cameras inside her apartment so he could watch her, something Carolyn had no idea was happening. Over the following months, Kenneth kept returning to her apartment to check on the cameras, and on June 10th, he went back again during his lunch break. What he didn't realize was that Carolyn had also decided to go home that day, and because he had left work early, he had no way of knowing. Kenneth was used to her spending lunch breaks at the office, so her unexpected arrival caught him completely off guard. According to his confession, he was inside the apartment when he suddenly heard a key turning in the lock. He quickly hid just out of sight behind the front door, and when Carolyn entered, he realized he had nowhere to escape. Knowing she was about to see him, Kenneth attacked, slamming her to the floor and striking her several times in the head. Then he grabbed a pair of scissors and a screwdriver from her belongings and began stabbing her, mostly in the neck. Once she was dead, Kenneth tried to clean the scene with bleach, but there was far too much blood to remove. He collected all the hidden cameras, fled the apartment, and later returned to the office as if nothing had happened. In January 2023, Kenneth was sentenced to 45 years in prison for the murder, along with an additional 10 years for conspiracy to commit murder for trying to pay his cellmate to carry out more killings. Before sentencing, Kenneth gave a final statement in court, apologizing to Carolyn's family. He said, "I'm sorry every day for my choices. If there were any way I could take back what I've done, I would without question. I deeply regret the pain I have caused you all. There are no words large enough to express the atrocities I've committed or the misery I brought upon you." He also apologized to his own family, who were present in the courtroom. "I'm sorry for the way I am and for hiding it from you all my life. The facade I built kept you from seeing any warning signs. I can only imagine the pain I've caused by the shock of learning the truth." Still, many people involved in the case questioned the sincerity of Kenneth's remorse. Not only had he brutally killed Carolyn to avoid being exposed, but he had also been willing to pay his cellmate to murder innocent people, all in a desperate attempt to escape responsibility for his own crime. As for Kenneth's wife, she had no idea what he had been doing behind her back and filed for divorce soon after his arrest. Despite his supposed remorse, Kenneth tried to appeal his sentence almost immediately after it was given. He argued that some of the evidence had been obtained in violation of his constitutional rights and should have been excluded from the case. But in late 2024, the court rejected his appeal, finding no legal issues in how the investigation had been conducted. As a result, the original sentence was upheld. At this point, there is little doubt that Kenneth Saul will spend the rest of his life behind bars. If you found this case intriguing, make sure to like and subscribe. We upload new crime case videos every night. Stay tuned and brace yourself for what's coming next.